Hey everyone, and welcome to the Perfect Bite podcast, your fusion of food and entrepreneurship. You'll hear stories from chefs, restaurateurs, CPG brands, and more from the food and bev industry. All of them are at different points in their journeys, talking about their experiences and how they've cooked up something new. Let's dig in. Hi everyone, and welcome back to the Perfect Bite podcast. I'm your host, Sarah Perkins. I met today's guest over 2 decades ago in middle school north of Chicago. One of us became a Michelin-starred chef, and the other yaps into a microphone. You can guess who was the cooler of the two of us. But seriously, I am beyond honored to have reconnected with and have on the show today an acclaimed chef and the founder of Hill's Research Kitchen. Please welcome Chef Henry Hill.
Hey, how are you? Thank you for having me here.
I am so happy to see you. It is truly wild how we knew each other as preteens and teenagers and then reconnected through food. It just shows you how it brings everyone together.
Yeah, definitely a little bit of a full circle moment.
Crazy. So we got to thank Chicago and we got to thank food for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, let's take it back just a little bit here. I'd love to hear about when you first fell in love with food and any favorite foods you might have had as a kid.
You know, growing up as a kid, I feel like I was a really picky eater.
Yeah.
Like most kids, probably, I ate like 5 things. And there were a couple of milkshakes were up there.
Oh, yeah.
French fries were up there, all the good stuff. I did have, growing up, this like group of roommates that lived across the street from us. And one of them was like a health guru. And he started kind of introducing me to wellness. So even at a young age, I had a little bit of an awareness of like nutrition and holistic medicine. And, you know, he was like a massage therapist. And so it was interesting. While I was like a picky eater, I was also like looking up to this person who was just like really into health and wellness. And I think that kind of maybe planted the seed for thinking about food in a little bit of a different light.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially because we're talking 90s and early 2000s in the Midwest. I know my parents did such a good job of like, let's try to get color on your plate, but I don't know if it was described to me the exact same way as that of like why it's important. Just, okay, eat the vegetables.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there's a lot of, I don't know. I just feel like there's a lot of, I don't want to use the word misinformation, but new information. I tell people this all the time, clients, everybody I talk to, I'm like, the reality is scientific theory states that there is no way to prove a hypothesis true. You can only ever prove it wrong. And so a hypothesis is that until proven wrong. And the reason is because information is always evolving. We're always getting new information. And so something that was once true yesterday may not be true today because we're getting smarter, hopefully. And so I think that that's where things can get a little convoluted and people believe something to be true. And it's easy to stay in that mindset, but we need to be flexible, especially in times like now where things are constantly evolving and changing, and be open to realizing that there's new information out there and what was good or bad yesterday may not be good or bad today.
Yeah, I feel like that's almost a very meditative way of looking at food and at life. Something can be true in one moment, but it can change and be false the next. And we'll dive into what's going on these days and how you and others in the industry are keeping up with all that too. So I want to hear a little bit more about your culinary journey. So again, you're growing up, you're starting to learn a little bit about food and the role it plays with your body and your health, but what really made you fall in love with flavors and textures and everything that's beautiful that comes from the culinary arts? What was really the start of that? And then the aha moment that made you realize, I really want to do this, maybe as a career even.
I don't think it quite happened that way.
Never does.
Yeah,
it's never linear.
It never does. It never does. Yeah. So I was maybe not the best student, probably not the most obedient necessarily either. And so my grandfather, he took me out to dinner and he was kind of grilling me at this restaurant. And he was like, if you tell me what you're going to do for a career, I'll help you pay for your college or we'll figure this journey out. Mm-hmm. And that didn't end up being the course for me. But at the end of the dinner, he went up to the owner of the restaurant and he said, because I was like looking around and he was like forcing me to give him an answer. And I saw hats bobbing around in the kitchen. And I was like, I'll just be a chef. I was just trying to get out of the conversation.
Wow.
And so he went up to the owner of the restaurant after dinner and he said, my grandson wants to be a chef. Do you have any jobs open? And the owner of the restaurant said, yeah, we need a dishwasher and a busboy. And that's how I got into restaurants. And so I feel like I didn't really fall in love with like cuisine or flavors or any of that. I fell in love with fire and knives and camaraderie, I think was a big one. And just like how connected the people are in the kitchen and how, I don't know, it's just something about energy of being in the trenches with those guys that kind of connects everyone. And I just thought it was really cool. And over time, I got just more into it because I wanted to be like the most badass chef I could.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how I started obsessing over this food business that I'm in now.
And your story, a lot of folks have shared that with me too. Like you start in one position in a kitchen and you work your way up to what you think is a better fit for you. And it sounds like you thrived off of that passion, off of a little of the chaos that's going on back there. You said knives and fire, which
Exactly.
it's awesome. So what were some of those first types of cuisine that you think that really spoke to you, that were different, that they weren't just the meat and potatoes we were used to?
The first restaurant I worked at was just like a bistro. And it was kind of like French fare, steak frites, and escargot, and that kind of thing. And I was like, this is cool because it's cool to like work in a kitchen. But the food was, I was like good, but not really amazing. But this restaurant just so happened to be right next door to an ultra fine dining restaurant, which was called Carlos Restaurant. It was like a Zagat at the time, top rated French restaurant in Chicago. And the owner came from La Francais, which is an iconic restaurant from like the 80s that probably no one remembers anymore. But I used to chain smoke cigarettes when I was like way too young in the alley, as we chefs do.
Yes.
I quit smoking years ago, but I would just like smoke cigarettes before my shift in the alley and chop it up with the guys across next door. And I'd be like, you guys are wearing like all these vests and suits and bow ties. And I'm like, I'd never seen that before. What's going on in there? And one day the manager of the restaurant comes out and she offered me a job as a server at their sister restaurant, which was in Ravinia Park, which is like an outdoor concert venue in the Chicago area and seasonal restaurant. So it was only open during the summertime. And so I went and started as a server. I was probably like 15 or 16, I think I was a server. And she was getting her SOM at the time. So she would like blind test me on like wines and everything. And so I started learning and developing a palate at a really young age for that kind of thing. And she was dating the sous chef at the flagship Carlos restaurant. And I had realized it seems like the people that own restaurants aren't usually servers. It seems like the chefs a lot of times end up becoming restaurant owners, and the kitchen was a little bit more fun to me than the dining room. I would always get nervous in front of people. And I remember I would like serve martini glasses and my hand would be shaking. I was like, I don't like being in front of people. I want to go back into the kitchen. And so she somehow convinced her boyfriend to start teaching me the kitchen at Carlos. And when I got in the kitchen there, it was like the dining room was a show with the silver dome and white glove, and everyone did the whole like domes off all at the same time and the voila and everything, which was really cool. But the food was just as cool. And I'd never seen anything so artfully plated and all these different flavors. And so the only way I think I can describe it is the alchemy of the kitchen. And so just seeing food as food, and prior to that moment, it was substance. And then at that moment and moving forward, it became something more, which is a transformation of substance into a complete thought, like an idea on a plate rather than just like calories. if that makes sense.
Yeah. Carlos was really your first moment that you saw the art that's behind food, and agreed with you in that it took me a long time in life too to ever see food that way. Why would someone pay so much money for that experience and all of that? And then you realize, wow, it's really special. And someone took the time to do that.
And I think it's beyond that. I think I love music, especially after working in several concert venues now. I love music. I love food. I love different types of art. I love like cinema and I love books. And what I've realized is that it's a little bit more than that. I think really as a human being, we're limited in life in the ways that we can experience the world
Mm.
because we only have these five senses. And that's the only touch points that we have to interact with the world around us. And so being able to experience taste is 1/5 of the way that you experience the world. And so elevating that experience elevates your livelihood in kind of a way. And I think that it's taken me a long time to wrap my head around that, but I feel like that's what we're doing in fine dining. We're trying to elevate the way that people experience the world around them. And that's what the arts are too. It's helping you experience the world in a better way so that we can all appreciate it.
Yeah. I think that's so beautifully said. And it's so important to hear right now when it feels like every time you look at the news, everything just feels awful.
Well, don't do that.
Just don't look. Just don't look. I try to limit. I
Don't
limit at
look.
certain times, but it's a good, you make a good point that there's an importance to the balance of that too. It doesn't matter. It actually doesn't matter how much you read the news. In some ways, there are always going to be tough moments in life. Everyone's always going to experience some level of challenges, but if you have art and you have things that make you smile, then it makes it a lot easier to get through.
Absolutely. And it's an expression. So a lot of that art comes from those tumultuous moments. There's always the difficulty of the story behind it that creates the masterpiece. And that's the beauty of it too, not just the piece, but understanding how it came to fruition to begin with.
Yeah. How would you describe those next moments then after Carlos as you started to create your own identity on the plate, your own form of expression? You've lived and traveled all over. What were some of those next places that you went and started to become the chef that you are today?
My existential crisis, even when I was at Carlos and very young, was that I never thought I'd be able to have an idea. And I was just working and learning all these techniques. And I was like, man, how do you guys come up with this stuff? Can't have ideas like that. Yeah. And I think it's something that you find like throughout your career. It's in the doing that the creating starts to kind of come together. I don't have a story about how I went on this journey to find myself and had a creative kind of moment or realization. It was more of just like the grind. And I think a lot of the best ideas probably that I had were born out of a combination of just almost like the tricks that you have up your sleeve and the necessity in the moment and the urgency. I think it's very difficult for people to create without urgency. And so the urgency is where you're forced to squeeze something out that's unique and original and interesting.
Yeah, I've heard that Thomas Keller has that sign in his kitchen, sense of urgency, and feeling it for
Yes.
so many different things in that moment.
Yes. And it helps to have an outside force to help you feel that. But I think a part of maturing is the ability to be able to create that for yourself in different ways. So because we go through, and certainly as a manager, I learned this, which was another kind of like separate journey, but also necessary, where we go through this process of being dependent, being independent, and then being
Mm.
interdependent. So I think beginning, you need someone to help you create urgency. And then you think, I can create urgency for myself. And then it goes to how do we do this in a little bit more of a symbiotic way that can be healthy?
Yeah, a more collaborative sense of motivation and mission
Yes,
and vision.
exactly.
So Tell the folks some of the spots that you worked at before you came home to Chicago and had a really big moment yourself.
I went kind of all over, really. Even in Chicago, while I was working at Carlos Restaurant, I was working other places as well. I worked at a sushi bar at lunch for free just because I thought it was so cool. Sushi knives and like the whole, I think Japanese culture and tradition is still to this day is so interesting. And I used to work for free. They called me the Stage Master 5000 at True back in the day.
Wow.
Gail Gann, you probably from Highland Park remember Gann Qatar on 41,
Yeah.
which was Gail Gann, who's like another famous pastry chef who used to have a show on Food Network. That was her dad's shop. And I was her dad's server at Ravinia. She came in with him one day and I told her I wanted to learn the kitchen. And she was a co-owner with her husband at the time, Rick Tremano at True. And so she set me up and I did a stage there. And I tried to get a job and they said that they wouldn't hire me. And I kept going back and staging and just learned a lot about like how to behave in that kind of an environment. It was like the Alinea of its time
Yeah.
in a lot of ways. And then I wrote letters to probably pretty close to every Michelin star restaurant in the country. And the first one that got back to me was Alizé in the Palms Hotel in Las Vegas. So when I was 18, I packed up my car and moved out to Vegas and started at my first Michelin star restaurant. There wasn't a guide in Chicago at the time, so I had to look elsewhere for the stars, and Vegas had the guide, and there was always like this mystery behind Michelin, especially since we didn't have it in Chicago at the time. So I took myself out west for that experience and then bought a one-way plane ticket to Bangkok. And I always had the dream of exploring the world. Even when I was young, I would tell everyone I was going to ride my motorcycle to Argentina one day and to just see it all. And I remember one of the guys at Carlos, he was like, a friend of mine said that when he was your age too, and it never happened. And I was like, no, I'm going to do it. So when I was living in Vegas, I bought 6 months in advance a one-way ticket to Thailand. I picked it just because it was the cheapest place I could stretch my dollar at the time. And so I said, this date, whatever's happening, I'm getting on the plane and I'm going out to Asia. And at the time, there was just a lot going on in my life. I could have never known what was happening. And I got on the plane and it ended up being like one of the richest probably experiences that I've had, and ended up out there for a while, traveled around Asia, all over Cambodia, Laos, Vietnam, and then Thailand, and probably spent like 9 to 12 months just in Bangkok, working at restaurants and living life. And then my step grandpa got sick. And as it happens, people get old. So I came back to Chicago and stayed with my grandparents for a little bit while he had a disease like similar to Parkinson's, and they just needed a little bit of extra support. And I was working at an Italian restaurant called Maderno back in the Chicago suburbs. And while I was working there, they had an opportunity to do a dinner at the James Beard House. So the chef at the time, he said, you're coming. The sous chef's got to stay because someone's got to run the restaurant. He said, you're going to come and do the beard dinner with me. So I got really lucky, went out to New York, and I said, you know, I've always wanted to work at one of these iconic New York restaurants, Le Bernardin, Restaurant Daniel, 11 Madison Park. And he said, why don't you just go hand out your resume and see what happens? So I knocked on the back door of all these restaurants and ended up landing a stage. And I ended up getting a stage at Restaurant Danielle and at 11 Madison Park. So I took another trip out for my stage and was able to spend a day in both those kitchens. And James Kent was the chef de cuisine at 11 Madison Park at the time. And she ended up hiring me. And after he hired me, I said, James, you got a stack of resumes on your desk. And I'm sure some people have way more experience than I do. I'm like, I just have to know, why'd you decide me? And he said, well, your name's Henry Hill, like the guy from Goodfellas. And he's like, I went to high school with the guy that played him as a kid. And I was like, I got to give Henry Hill a chance. So that's one of my many James Kent stories. He was an awesome
Oh
guy.
my gosh. Yeah. And again, he very sadly passed away this last year.
Yes.
Goodness.
Yes.
Oh my goodness. I need a book from you, to be honest. Like that just alone, it was so vivid. And I had so many questions that came up just during that story. What did you learn when you were in Thailand and beyond that you were able to bring back? And it sounds like you almost built that confidence then to say, okay, I'm going to try it. I'm going to get in front of these folks, these icons.
I think a part of it, this is what I tell people at least. I don't know if it's true or if I just make it up and try to buy into what I tell myself, but I think a part of it is just, I call it a survivor
Mm.
mentality. Being able to kind of end up in a situation and just learn how to survive and learn from the failure and it's painful and being able to just quickly adapt and not dwell on it and survive in those moments and just keep getting stronger. And you're going to keep making mistakes. And the more risks you take, the more they're going to hurt. And the more chances that kind of come out of them at the end of the day as well.
Yeah. And if you don't take any risks, then nothing's ever going to happen. So tell us about your time at 11 Madison and your work with James.
James and I kind of crisscrossed a little bit. So I was hired at 11 Madison Park, the tail end of a group of hirings. And so a lot of the way that they promote within 11 Madison Park was through seniority. And they a lot of times hire like their interns will work for them. And then they want to like mold people from scratch from very beginning, which is understandable. You kind of get people hooked into your system and everything, and there's no bad habits. And a lot of the people that want to work there are very motivated to learn and grow quickly. I had some experience already, and James was like, you're not going to be happy. You're going to spend a year just like in a position and that you're not going to be happy. And I ended up working at 11 Madison Park probably for 6 months or so before he said, there's an opening at our sister restaurant, the Nomad. And he was like, I really think that you should go over there and take that job. And I was really upset.
Yeah. You're like, why?
Him and Chef Humm. Yeah, I'm like, I just moved out to New York, dude. I wanted to work at 11 Madison Park. And him and Chef Humm sat me down and they were like, this is going to be good for you. You're going to get to be more hands-on with a lot of different things. And I was still kind of begrudging, but went over there and ended up working at the Nomad. And they were probably right. It ended up being an awesome experience. It definitely was like a rock and roll version of 11 Madison Park. And I met some incredible people that worked there and ended up becoming roommates with one of the guys. Josh Harden was my roommate. He was a sous chef at the time. And now he's a co-owner at 11 Madison Park.
Oh.
And Michael Religer, who ended up becoming the executive chef of the Nomad in Las Vegas and another really talented chef. And so there were like, I don't know, 5 or 6 of us living in like a 4-bedroom apartment, one guy on the sofa, living in Manhattan.
Yep.
On like $11 an hour. And it was really fun. I had an amazing time. I learned, I think, the gold standard of a lot of things, building culture, just like seasoning food, tasting, attention to detail in every regard, seeing people work at their best. It would be hard to find excellence in that way on your own without having an example of it in front of you to begin with. So I feel like sometimes I'm still unpacking what I learned there.
And I think you will for life. I mean, when you are, like you said, in those situations where the highest level of excellence is expected from everyone, you've heard this at 11 Madison Park, Charlie Trotter's, places like this where you're pushed to that limit. It's kind of like being an Olympic athlete. You're pushing to the highest level that you can absolutely get, which is awesome.
Yeah.
But tough.
Oh, it's incredible. It's painful and it's not for everyone. And so I think that that's where the controversy comes from, where people say, is it appropriate to treat people in this way? And there's a lot of people that work there that felt like it was a really tough environment to work in. And there was a lot of people that worked there, and that felt like it was a really tough environment to work in, but it wouldn't have been the same without that. And so is always that growth from difficulty. And it takes a certain type of person to do that. I think about the Navy SEALs all the time. It's like, I wouldn't want anyone not to go through that and be a part of the Navy SEALs, right?
Yeah.
We have to experience the hell week in order to get to that level, to become that kind of a person. So,
Yeah.
not that 11 Madison Park was like, I don't want to make a comparison to being in hell. It was an amazing experience, but it's hard. Doing anything incredible is hard. And I do think that that's something that we are struggling with a little bit culturally
Mhm.
right now, where we went maybe a little bit too far in that direction and then too far in the other direction. And now it's rebalancing, and we'll see where we end up.
Yeah, it's almost like you're describing just two types of coaching, basically. Some folks love almost like being screamed at and, go, go, go. Other folks need light love. But I think you're right that it's somewhere in the middle where it's like there's honesty, but there's a level of caring and showing like, I care about you because of X and I'm pushing you because of this. And I'm
Yes.
interested to see where
And
that ends up.
And that was something that I think that they did really well. It was whenever you did get reprimanded or yelled at, usually you were pulling aside after,
Yeah.
and they were like, hey, I did that because I know you can take it. And
Mm,
I know you're better than that. And like the build up after. And that's really, I think that's important. And that's something that probably a lot of managers miss the opportunity to like re-bond after. And then also understanding, which is really hard. I feel like I've lived a lot of life. I've met a lot of people. I'm fortunate to have had a lot of good and bad life experiences. And from that, you learn to understand people a little bit and understand that different personality types need to be handled in different ways. And you're not really taught that as a chef. You're taught that as like a psychologist, but not as a chef. And managing a team, you need to be a little bit of a psychologist too, and be like, okay, where is this person at? Where they're coming from? What's the best way to talk to them and to get an improvement? And understand that the way that maybe, and that this was difficult for me, understand that the way that you think you should handle this situation might just be like impulsive or coming from your own place of ego rather than focusing on the results that you actually want out of the situation. And if you approach in X way, are you going to get the result that you actually want from this person? And so that I think is always the challenge to be able to kind of extract out of a management position.
100%. I've been there too. And sometimes I cringe thinking about like how I approached certain situations in the past. But like you said, it takes experience, it takes maturity, it takes some of those mistakes to say, I'm going to do it better next time. And it sounds like, again, you come from this very well seasoned position and are still very young. I'd like to say we're young. We've still got a lot of life
Yeah,
ahead here.
I feel the same.
Right. So I want to go to what was really your big homecoming to Chicago. You ended up at the wonderful Dusek, which was part of Talia Hall in Chicago. So famous institution, amazing concert hall that had this incredible restaurant attached to it. How did you land that position? And please tell everyone the amazing moment that then happened with that.
So I was coming to the end of my time in New York. Part of it is I even remember talking to one of the sous chefs. He's like, I got to put a clock on New York. This place is crazy. It's expensive. It's late nights, early mornings. And I was like, you are right, my man. Like, New York is a beast. And I'm like, I can only do like 10, 12 bucks an hour living in Manhattan for so long. And so it was time. It was just time. I needed to figure out what the next thing was going to be. And so I came back to Chicago. I helped open a restaurant for a little bit called Solero, which was in the West Loop. It was a
Yeah.
Spanish restaurant that I'm still like consider a lot of the people that work there some of my very best friends. We had an awesome team opening. And so I worked there for a little bit while I was like hunting for what the next thing was going to be. I really wanted a sous chef position. And there was the old chef from Maderno that I did the James Beard dinner with, who took a job at Dusek's, and he said, I need a sous chef, Henry. What do you think? And I was like, let's do it. So I ended up at Dusek's, and that place was a lot. The kitchen was crazy. When I started there, it was a little bit of a shit show. It was messy. The volume that we were doing with the concert venue was insane. Cooks were screaming at each other, screaming at managers. There was a guy that, actually, maybe I shouldn't tell that story, but it was
We
just
want the
like,
dirt.
it was, I don't know if you want that dirt. It was just wild. This place was a beast, and it was on the south side of Chicago. All the line cook talent in Chicago at that time was in like Logan Square, Wicker Park. Everyone lived on the north side. There wasn't a lot of talented cooks that were willing to travel that far south for work. And because of being a cook, it's a low paying job. Public transportation isn't amazing to the south side. If you've got an Uber, it's just not going to work out. So you want a job closer to where you live. So it was really difficult to find talent to work in the kitchen. And just the culture was incredibly toxic. And probably like 2 months after I started, the chef that hired me put in like a 3-day notice and was out. He was out.
He has been your fairy godfather in some ways. So that must have been a little tough.
He definitely has been.
That must have been tough
It
to
was
be like,
very
where are
tough.
you going?
So he was just taking over for another chef de cuisine. Jared Wentworth was the executive chef, but he was also running like 3 other properties. So he was spread across a lot of different responsibilities. He was a chef owner, and they had a growing restaurant group. And so there was kind of like this limbo time. And there were 2 other sous chefs at the time. Both of them put in their notice and quit. And all of a sudden, I was like the only guy that didn't have another job lined up. And I was in charge of this group of like 25 cooks at the age of, I think I started there when I was 23 or 24 years old. And I'd never managed a person in my life. So I took over the kitchen, and I was a tyrant. I tasted every single dish that went out. I threw food right back in people's faces if it was not the way exactly it was supposed to be. I was probably not liked by a lot of people there, and demanded exactly what I experienced in New York, which was the very best out of everyone that worked there. I'm lucky that Jared was the executive chef when I started there, and I was under him because he was older, a little bit more seasoned, and would come in and kind of like smooth things over and tell jokes. And he was just like a really fun guy to be around. So it was great to work with him and see how he handled things. And over time, I think I had to come to the realization that what I was expecting was okay, but the way that I was trying to extract those results could be handled in a different way. And so I ended up pulling together my management strategy, which was like a little bit from all the chefs that I worked with. And so I started having 3 days a week, we'd have pre-shift kitchen meetings where everyone would just get together. We talk about the show. We talk about if anyone had any problems with each other, that was the time. You're like, not even with each other, like with each other, with what was going on, like someone didn't put something away properly, rather than it's the whispers
The
that
gossip,
destroy a culture.
totally.
And so I was like, we're not going to whisper about anything. There's not going to be any talking behind anyone's back. This is the time, pre-shift. We're going to talk openly. You can call people out. It's not going to be a screaming match, but someone did something wrong, you say it in front of everyone. You say it in front of everyone, or you say it in front of no one.
Okay.
And so we'd have an open forum where people would talk to each other about doing something right, doing something wrong. It ended up being really, I think, constructive. And then I eventually convinced the owner to close for one day a month for lunch. And during that time, I would have all the cooks come in. And I'm fortunate to have a big enough team that it was meaningful. Dusek and Thalia Hall was a 25,000 square foot property that probably did between anywhere from 6 to 10 million a year in revenue. So it was a really big property, really big team. We did a lot of volume. I had a catering team, I had a brunch team, and I had a dinner team. And I had, if I could fully staff, because we were experiencing a tight labor market at the time too, I had a chef de cuisine, executive sous chef, and 3 sous chefs. So I had a pretty flushed out like management team as well. And then we probably had a 5-person brunch team, like 3-person catering team, and a prep team, and then 6 or 8-person dinner team. So it was a pretty robust team, which I think helps when you're trying to structure these programs, smaller teams that can be a little bit more intimate.
Yeah.
And so you got to adjust your process. But what I would do is we'd close for lunch and I'd put a sous chef with a group. So it was like 4 or 5 cooks and a sous chef. And then they got a whiteboard piece of paper, and I had primary topics that we talked about every month. And it was 1% improvements, community engagement, and education. And those were the topics that the groups talked about. But then the cooks got to fill in what they wanted to work on under those topics every month. So the team ended up writing their own monthly mission statement that I would then hang up in the office. And so instead of me building the culture, they built the culture and I supported. When I was working in the suburbs, I worked at a place called Sage Grill. The owner did like a wine deal, and he realized that the majority of the patrons at the restaurant, after he looked at the zip codes on the credit cards, are coming from within a 5-mile radius of the restaurant. And that's true for most neighborhood and independent restaurants. So that's why I realized community engagement is really important for a restaurant, because you need to be involved in the community because they are the ones supporting your business at the end of the day. Education helps people feel value out of what they're doing in the kitchen and gets them involved in a deeper level than just clocking in, clocking out. And 1% improvements meant I can't buy a new oven. I can't buy all this new shiny stuff for the kitchen. We have to work with what we have. What's something that we can do 1% every day that makes this place a little bit better? And so that ended up becoming the mission statement. And then a part of the education piece was I would have a vendor come in and talk about the product. And we do a little bit of a training session with different vendors around Chicago, which also built our relationships with the vendors, the cooks' relationships with the vendors. And just, I think, is probably still why I have a lot of good relationships with those vendors to this day. I even have a story about I had someone tell me, I was talking about a 3 Michelin star restaurant, and because I worked at one, I worked at 11 Madison Park. I was talking about what it's like to work in a 3 Michelin star restaurant. And someone said, I've never even eaten at a 3 Michelin star restaurant. And they're like, how am I supposed to know what that's like? And I'm like, well, if we're going to keep 1 star, you have to know what the 3-star looks like, because this is just the base level. And we got to push harder to retain this. And so I was like, what am I going to do? And I called Curtis Duffy, or Michael Muser was the one that actually answered the phone at Grace. And I said, one of my cooks said he'd never eaten at a 3 Michelin star restaurant. How do we change that? So they invited us over, the whole team. Everyone got in Ubers, and we picked a day and we went over to Grace, and the whole Dusek's kitchen team shook hands with everyone in the Grace kitchen, and they had little amuse-bouches for us to try. And we walked around the kitchen and opened coolers and talked to the cooks, and everyone was able to experience a 3 Michelin star restaurant and take that back to Dusek and Thalia Hall. And so I think it's moments like that and like giving back to the team that's like special as a manager.
Henry, you're going to make me cry. I'm just like, I'm so proud to just like even know you and hear your story of how you recognize like how you could lead better. And everything you just said is such an amazing example for leadership, whether it's in the kitchen or anywhere else that people work together and come together. So thanks for sharing that. That was really sweet. That was really special. And I think the folks that have worked with you are going to remember that forever.
I hope so. I hope so.
And during that time, you ended up earning a Michelin star as executive chef. One of probably
We did.
arguably one of the youngest chefs to earn a Michelin star. And so all of your hard work and learnings and bringing the team, community, and industry together really paid off for you.
Absolutely. Yeah. The same camaraderie that got me into it was what I ended up being most passionate about. Even now, it's about the food, but it's about the people behind the food that I think make this business really special.
Yeah. You show a lot of love to people. So thank you. So you very quickly reached a pinnacle, a huge moment that anyone in the industry you're in would have wanted to reach. When did you decide, okay, that was great. I'm going to go do something totally on my own and take another huge risk?
So it was while I was working at Dusek that I was working on this little side project, which was carbonated coffee. And I think a part of it was just like the really tight labor market. It's incredibly stressful to work in a restaurant. And I can't tell you how many days I walked into work knowing that it was not going to be possible for me to be successful, not because we weren't doing incredible things, but because there just weren't enough people to do it. The restaurant had a demand for the volume that they wanted to do, regardless of how much labor there was to do it. And there was no compromise. It was just, you got to figure it out. And that was really stressful. When I was working with no other sous chefs, we opened for brunch at 7 a.m. So I was there at 5:30 and we had late night service after the concerts went out and we served food until 1 o'clock in the morning. So a lot of times I wouldn't get home until 2:30 and then be back at 5:30 on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday when there was brunch. And things did get better, especially after we got the star. We were able to attract a little bit more talent. The labor market, even to this day, is very tight. And there was a part of me, I was like, I love doing this. I don't know how I can do this to retirement. There's no way that I can physically continue to do this until retirement. It's just not possible. And so I started working on a packaged food product, and it was a carbonated coffee called Cafe Racer. And I thought maybe I would try to put something in the market and see how it went. So I chipped away at it for years. And someone we went to school with, Alex Shane, I don't know if you remember him, but he is like now an incredible 3D graphic artist,
Wow.
really talented guy. He ended up doing my label at that time, and it was called Cafe Racer. It was really cool. We had motorcycles and everything on it, and it was a carbonated coffee. I learned a lot about what not to do launching a product. I launched a carbonated coffee at the time that nitro was taking off. And so it's hard to like buck back against a trend that's going so strong in one direction.
Yep.
But there were a lot of amazing things that came out of it. I partnered with a consultant from McKinsey and Company and a local distributor called Norman Distribution. And they helped me get a booth out at Expo West, where I met the CFO of Hashi, which was owned by Kellogg's at the time. And after Expo West, I remember I was just grinding some like brunch service. I get a call from a California number and I'm like, I better take this.
Yeah.
And I step out and I take a call and I talk to this guy. He's, yeah, I stopped by your booth and tried your product. I thought it was really awesome. He said, my daughters are our demographic that we're targeting. And she said it was like top 2 favorite products that she tried at the show. So I figured maybe we could do some kind of partnership on this with our Bare Naked granola brand.
Wow.
And I was like, that sounds awesome. So I thought that was like my ticket.
Yeah.
I was like, all right, this is it. We're going to go big with this. And we put together all these pitch decks and had the graphic designers going about our marketing strategy and everything. And we show it to them. and everyone's getting excited. And we show it to a Costco buyer. We were going to do these pallet sets, co-branded, and we were selling it into Costco. And the buyer looks at the label and just goes, "This stuff's loaded with sugar."
Um,
And Kashi is more of a health
yeah.
centric brand. It seems like you might need to want to rethink a little bit of the formulation. We like the idea and it tastes good the way it is, but rethink the formulation. And coming from a chef perspective, you don't really think about that. You're like, make it taste
Yeah.
good, you
Like
know?
it's delicious. What are you talking
And
about?
yeah. And then when you go to CPG, people are like, look at the label before they try it.
Yeah.
And so it's a very different strategy. And so when I initially made the product, I worked with a flavor house that did the development based on a recipe I provided to them. For the second round of development, we needed a more intimate kind of engagement with a food scientist. So we worked with a lab and ran a pilot run, which failed. It did not work. And we were bootstrapping and didn't have any money to do another test with it. So I had to go back to the coffee guy and say, "Hey, I don't know what to do."
Yeah.
And he's like, this happens all the time. Put a pin in it, keep working on it. And we can always take a look at this if you can figure something out down the road. And they ended up introducing me to a lab that they worked with called Chew Innovation in Boston. So I get on a flight out to Boston and I meet with the owner of this lab and I spend a day working with him. When I meet him, he says, "Go in the kitchen." He's like, "You've got a great background, love the story, brand looks promising, cool partnership. I want you to go in the lab." And he's like, "I'm going to pair you up with a food scientist." The food scientist he paired me up with is now the CEO of Voyage Foods, Adam Maxwell, awesome guy. And he goes, work with him and I want you to make me what you made in the restaurant." So I made him like my original recipe. And Adam was over there showing me how to work the carbonator and all the different like tools in the lab. And I was like, I've worked at some cool restaurants, but I've never seen anything like this before. And so he tries it and he's like, "It's good. I like it, but it could be better if you worked with our team on this." He's like, "If we got everyone together on this, I think that there's something there." And so I go back in his office and he says, "I can't, as a consultancy, I can't put a 4-person team on this. I still have to pay their salaries.
Yeah.
But what I could do is offer you a job. And if you want to come work here, we could use your culinary chops in the lab and you could probably help us learn a lot about like taste profiles and culinary techniques. And we'll teach you how to develop products. And you could probably end up doing this on your own at some point if you wanted to." So I packed up and went out to Boston. And that was the start of my product development journey.
Wow. So you shipped off to Boston, literally. You became essentially like a chef or entrepreneur in residence for them, which I love. I've heard of this where folks are like, okay, I know you're working on something, but you can't maybe afford to pay other folks. Come right in residence and work with us.
I was an employee there. We worked on some really cool projects. I don't want to take anything away from anybody else that I worked with. I learned a lot from them, probably more than they learned from me. I was able to work with Fortune 500 companies and learned a lot about consumer insights, product development, building a strategy around your consumer, and then extracting an opportunity from a consumer profile and how innovation overlaps with, I guess, solving a problem in someone's life in a way. It's like great to be innovative. I guess this is like a Bezos thing. He's like, you're not disruptive if people don't buy it. Innovative's great, but it doesn't really do anything. Disruptive does stuff, right? So you want to be disruptive, not innovative.
Mm.
And if you can find a way to do both, then you might have something interesting, but really you want to be disruptive. So we found, I think, disruptive innovations that kind of filled needs in the market based on these brands' target consumers.
Yeah. So tell us how Hill's Research Kitchen was born from that. It sounds like you finally married kind of something you learned in childhood, which is like, what's in the food? Where does it come from? How does this all work? How is it helpful to us with the flavors that you developed over time?
And market, I
Okay.
mean, marketing is a huge piece of it as well that I resisted for a long time. I always thought if I just get really good at what I do and that other people will do all that for me, then the world just doesn't work that way. You got to learn how to market. You definitely have to learn how to market yourself more and more these days. So I came back to Chicago and I was working for a startup brand doing R&D and product development. I blew through all their formulas and they didn't really have any more product development for me to do. And they asked if I would go into sales. And again, I didn't have another job lined up. And I was like, really don't want to be a sales guy, but I guess I have to. I'll try it for a little bit and see how it goes. And so I did sales for a month or two and I was like, miserable. This is not for me. And I just didn't know where else to go. It was, I think, born out of
Hmm.
necessity. I was like, I can either go and work for a brand where you could go work for Gatorade, but then you're stuck on Gatorade for the rest of your life. And that's really boring. I don't want to do that. Or I can go work for another consultancy. And I didn't know of any in Chicago and I didn't want to go back to Boston. There's not a lot of them really that do that kind of work. And so I was like, maybe I'll just try consulting and see how that goes. And since I have this background of restaurants and product development and like a diverse skill set, I'm like, hopefully I can find a restaurant that needs menu development or whatever. And my first big project was building Radius, which was like a 60,000 square foot concert venue in the Pilsen area of Chicago, known for like EDM shows and all that. So that was kind of my first big project that got me started and got me started thinking like, hey, maybe I can actually do this.
Yeah. And how has it evolved since? What have you been working on? You've been doing some incredible content too. People really need to follow you and see the videos that you make with these recipes and the different products that you're working on.
Thank you. Thank you. It's evolved in a lot of different ways. I thought that I've learned a lot about the volatility of being a consultant and project-based work and kind of finding stability in cash flow in a business and the need to market yourself, especially in R&D. A lot of times you're protected by NDAs. You can't really talk about the projects that you're working on. So you need to find other ways to talk about what you're doing. So I've learned and evolved again and again throughout necessity in a lot of different ways. So from working with national chain restaurants and launching menu items with national chain restaurants and packaged food brands with multinational companies. And I've been a part of developing patents for equipment manufacturers and just like all kinds of things, commodity marketing boards, you name it, you name it.
Wow. So it's kind of cool because even though you were serving so many covers at a spot like Dusek's, you're now truly meeting millions of people where they are. And
Absolutely.
maybe your
Yeah. I've
name's
probably cooked for more people than anyone that I've ever met.
right.
They wouldn't even know it.
And right now, it doesn't have your name on the label. I think that I can totally see you doing that again in the future. I'm going to encourage you to. But you're providing that sense of care and love and flavor and something that, as you said, heightens someone's experience just in a totally different format. It's bringing that same sense
Exactly.
of mission just in the next version.
Yes. And there's a lot of problems with packaged food. There's a lot of problems with our food system. And that just means I got a lot of work to do.
Talk to us a little bit more about that. By the time this is released, I'll have no idea, and you'll have no idea necessarily what
Yes.
regulations or ordinances or little bingo ball that's pulled out of news to let us know what's going on. What's something that you're seeing within the industry right now? What are you doing to essentially put your armor on and work with others so that you can keep pushing forward?
I think that, yeah, you got to be clever. Whatever you're doing, you got to be clever in just trying everything and finding different ways and different strategies, especially with all the supply chain disruption that we're seeing and that kind of thing. I really believe in variety and moderation as a part of a healthy diet. There is no one food item that is going to be the magic thing for you. You have to eat a lot of different things. And so someone asked me a year ago, they said, what do you think the best plant-based milk is? And I said, I don't think that there is one because they're oat milk, almond milk, or cashew milk. And I'm like, what if there was a blend? Why isn't there? And I think we're starting to see more of that. And even if you look at Voyage Foods, I think what they're doing is really inspiring. They have this not peanut butter thing. It's a blend. It has a lot of different ingredients in it. And they do that not just because it works in the formula, but also because it works regardless of what is happening in the supply chain. They have more options to be able to manipulate the product while still maintain a certain flavor profile, regardless of supply chain disruption or environmental disruption in any particular commodity. So I think we've started in a place of diet of variety. We went to a place of more singular starch-based kind of center that we all grew up on, right?
Processed.
And now we're going, yeah, now we're going to have to end up going back to a place where we source a lot of different products to put something together so that you have more options. And I think we'll end up being healthier for it at some point as well.
100%. I feel like that's very reflective of an answer that Farmer Lee Jones, our mutual friend, had on his episode, which was,
Yeah.
he always says, we're just trying to grow as well as farmers did 100 years ago. So it's really going back to basics, going back to the earth, going back to what works and what worked. And that is going to cause some disruption amongst some billion-trillion-dollar industries. So I'm excited to see it happen in a lot of ways.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting.
So one last question before I ask you the world's best and hardest question here. What's some advice that you have for anyone wanting to get into the culinary space or just looking to start something new on their own, be their own entrepreneur?
I think go with your guts. I always tell people I felt like a lot of the folks in the food business I talk to feel this way too. It feels like the industry chose you.
Mm.
And so if you feel that kind of gravitation towards something, you just got to go for it because you really don't have anything to lose. And it's really the people that have the least to lose that are able to take the most chances. So I think you should go for it.
Love it. Thank you. All right. So this question here, the title of this podcast, The Perfect Bite, for two reasons. It's a little bit of a perfect bite of my career to date, from editor, journalist, to startup founder, to someone who works with folks in food and bev. And it's also because each of us has our own perfect bite. It's completely unique to us, from a special time or a meal or something that you say will just live with you forever in the best way possible. So, Henry, what is your perfect bite?
My perfect bite is actually kind of the entire, I think, lens that I have on the creation process for food in a way. So I'm not going to give you a straight answer.
That's okay.
Necessarily, but I'll give you a formula to create any perfect bite you want. And so I think that to create the perfect bite, you really want to activate every part of the palate. I have a theory that I tell people, the Big Mac theory. So how do you take some of the world's cheapest food ingredients and make one of the most popular food items to ever exist? And I think the reason that item was able to be so successful is because it hits so many different sensory elements, but with so few number of ingredients. And so you're able to experience 2 all beef patties, special sauce, lettuce, cheese on a sesame seed bun, right? And so you get a charbroiled patty, you get tang, sour crunch out of those pickles, the creaminess of the special sauce, probably a little bit of salt, the char on the bun, the toasted sesame seeds. And what you get is an experience in your mouth that is hitting every element of the taste bud and every element of sensory texture while still using a very limited number of ingredients. So it's not too confusing. And so whenever I'm trying to construct a perfect bite, whether it's for myself, for a loved one, for a client, I try to keep it as simple as possible, the fewest number of ingredients as I can, while still hitting as many of the sensory elements that you can. within those constraints. So that's my formula for the perfect bite.
I love it. I love how unique that answer was. And it's totally you. Henry, thank you again. This was incredible. I'm really sad to actually have to end this, but you gotta go. I gotta go make lunch. Tell the folks here where they can find you on social, as well as any websites, venues, spots that they can connect you with.
You can find me on my website, which is researchkitchen.com, or on pretty much all social platforms under Chef Henry Hill. So feel free to reach out and I'd be happy to chat.
Amazing. Thanks again, Henry. And thanks for everyone for tuning in to today's show. This was Chef Henry Hill's Perfect Bite. Thanks for tuning in to The Perfect Bite today. You can listen to future episodes on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and anywhere else you listen to podcasts. Thanks in advance for subscribing, rating, and reviewing. You can follow The Perfect Bite on social media @PerfectBitePod. Now go get something good to eat.